Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. It has been 10 years since I read this book, Ghost Rider by Neal Peart. In June of 2023, I made my list of best books of all time, and this book held place number 9. Neal Peart, who passed away in 2020, 68 years of age, is mainly known for his work as the drummer of the Canadian rock band Rush. Being a huge fan of their music, I not only admired Peart's phenomenal skills behind the drum kit, but his lyrics were also exceptionally good. After their 1984 studio album Grace Under Pressure, I somehow lost track of them, until their 20th album Clockwork Angels in 2012 was released. Out of curiosity and a sense of nostalgia for these musical heroes of my childhood, I bought this album. As it turned out, this would be their last studio album, and to me, it is one of their finest musical achievements. From this renewed interest in the band, I learned about this personal drama that had happened in Neal Peart's life while I was out of touch with the band. This was so severe that it forced him to take a sabbatical from the band for several years. About this life-changing period, Peart wrote the book Ghost Rider, which was first published in 2002. I read it in March of 2015. About a month later, my own life would take a rather sharp turn. In this video, I will revisit my reading experience of this book, which will always be dear to me. I will go into the details of the book, which won't spoil anything, as it is not a story with a plot and a surprising ending. This is a memoir about the time after the devastating loss of his daughter and wife, a time when Peart had no hope, meaning, faith, or desire to keep on living. His daughter was killed in a car accident, and not long after that, his wife succumbed to cancer. In a final attempt to come to grips with it all, Peart decides to step on his motorbike and to simply drive, looking for a reason to live in the hope that the roads he drives on for 14 months altogether turn out to have healing powers, which is the subtitle of the book, Travels on the Healing Road. The book is a jewel within the literature of mourning and recovery. On the morning of August 10th, 1997, more than a month after he had completed a long world tour with the band, Test for Echo, Neal and his wife Jackie Taylor said goodbye to their daughter and only child, Selena, with hugs and kisses. She was driving to Toronto to prepare for her academic year. The usual phone call that she had arrived safely didn't come, which worried Neal and Jackie greatly. In his distress over Selena's lack of a phone call, Peart watched a TV documentary about the Mormons' 1847 trek west. One woman who survived the grueling journey said, "The only reason I'm alive is because I could not die." That terrible phrase would come back to haunt me the months that followed. Late in the evening, a police car drove into the driveway of the Peart home, bringing the news that Selena, 19 years old, had been in a fatal car accident. Single car accident, apparently lost control, dead at the scene. Neal was consumed by grief, but Jackie's world was irreparably shattered. She had fallen to pieces and she never came back together again. If she couldn't have Selena, she no longer wanted anything. She wanted to die. The couple fled to London a few weeks after the devastating news. In his diary, Neal compares his grief to that of Jackie. It seemed I was already building a wall against things which were too painful for me to deal with. But Jackie remained raw and vulnerable, unable to protect herself from the horror of memory. It was like witnessing a suicide brought on by total apathy. She just didn't care. When they made plans to return to Canada in January of 1998, Jackie started having health problems. She turned out to have cancer and was immediately given up by the doctors. The doctors called it cancer, But of course it was a broken heart. A second nightmare began. Jackie received the news almost gratefully. To her, the illness was a terrible kind of justice. To me, however, it was simply terrible and unbearable. After Jackie's swift passing, a series of strokes brought a relatively merciful end. Neal remains utterly beaten. I didn't really have a reason to carry on. I had no interest in life, work, or the world beyond. Yet there was this innate urge to survive, or rather an inability to die like that Mormon woman. Neal camps out in his country house on a lake north of Montreal a few months after his wife's death. He had already told the other members of the band Rush on the day of Selena's funeral, "Consider me retired." He decides to go on a long ride on his motorcycle without any clear goal. I didn't know where to or for how long, but I knew I had to go. My life depended on it. On August 20, a year and 10 days after the death of Selena, he rides away on his BMW 1100 GS. Just driving. Just kept moving, afraid to stop for too long, afraid to give myself time to think. The fact that I myself have been an enthusiastic motorcyclist for many years helped to put myself in his leathers and boots. Peart's first rather vague destination is the most northernly inhabited part of Canada, Inuvik. The only thing he has done in preparation is make a reservation on the ferry from Haines, Alaska to Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Fine if he makes it. If he doesn't, that's fine too. The goal is not to arrive somewhere, but the task he has set himself is to nurture what he calls my little baby soul as well as I could. Earlier that summer, contemplating the wreckage of my life, I had determined that my mission now was to protect a certain essence inside me, a sputtering life force, a meager spirit, as though I held my cupped hand around a guttering candle. The whole idea is that time should be allowed to do its work as a healer. But for that to happen, time must pass, preferably as painlessly as possible. Try to minimize the self-destructive urges and stay away from the house on the lake for a while. Let time pass. Take my little baby soul for a ride. During his meandering journeys, Peart regularly passed through areas that I know from my own travels. The 460 pages are largely filled with descriptions of the landscapes and settlements, with their history. His encounters with people, although he tries to avoid them as much as possible. Memories of previous motorcycle trips with his buddy Brutus, while he was on tour with Rush. Maintenance work on his motorcycle, weather reports, the many hotels and meals, the various speeding tickets he receives, the books he reads, often in combination with writers' biographies that are linked to the area he's driving through, but above all, the steady development of his little baby soul. The book is never whiny, self-pitying, or gloomy. Peart does not shy away from describing his crying fits and melancholy, but these do not predominate. Nor does the author pretend anywhere to have answers. Practically everything he does serves the passing of time on his way out of this mental hell. The author thinks back on the many people who helped him and Jackie after Selena's death and him alone after Jackie's death. He found it difficult to accept that help. John Steinbeck once wrote that sometimes the nicest thing you can do for someone is to allow them to do something for you. And I learned the truth of that insight too. For perhaps the first time in my life, I surrendered my independence and my proud self-sufficiency, and once I had opened that window to the warm breeze of compassion, my worldview was utterly transformed. I fell into their open arms. I used to think life is great, but people suck. But now I've had to learn the opposite. Life sucks, but people are great. Another passage, in my opinion, illustrates the absolute incomprehensibility of the emotions for someone who has not experienced comparable deep sadness. Without knowing it, I had identified a subtle but important part of the healing process. There would be no peace for me, no life for me, until I learned to forgive life for what it had done to me, forgive others for still being alive, and eventually forgive myself for being alive. This, the trick that life played on Peart, recurs in several places in the book. In one of the most beautiful letters in the book to Jackie's brother, Stephen, he describes that trick as betrayal. Everything that we were, everything we based our lives upon, everything that we believed is gone. I concluded that I had been betrayed by life itself. But finding a form of life again is not easy, because all previous faith and purpose in life have disappeared. We will never trust life again. With some difficulty over a muddy dirt road, Peart reaches the small settlement of Inuvik in the far northwest of Canada. The weather is bad and the road is difficult to pass. When he wants to take the road west to Alaska the next day, it rains heavily. Should the rain continue, he might get stranded somewhere, which makes him anxious. Not so much because of a flat tire or that he might fall, although he fears that too, of course. Much more dangerous to me was the idea of being stuck somewhere, with too much time to think and the feeling of being trapped. Peart eventually makes it to the ferry of Prince Rupert. From there he travels to Vancouver, where he visits his brother Danny and Jeanette, his wife. In the last weeks of her life, Jackie, with help from her sister Deb, decided who would get what of her jewelry. The pearl necklace that Neal once gave her had to go to Janet. So I had been carrying those pearls, carefully wrapped, on a delivery mission which now spanned 13,000 kilometers and almost 3 weeks. Peart travels through British Columbia and Alberta, further south, through Utah and California, along cities and roads I am familiar with. He also discovers that walking provides a similar kind of escape as riding a motorcycle. He occasionally goes on long walks, and when he is still in bear country in Canada, he follows the advice of experienced hikers there to make as much noise as possible during his walk so that any bears present are not startled by his sudden presence. So he sings a lot, convinced that no bear can tolerate that, and has conversations with himself while he walks. He writes about this in his diary. Definitely scary to know they're all around and unpredictable, and wanting my ham and cheese sandwich. I know this feeling very well, although I always armed myself with bear spray, a large can of pepper spray with quite an impressive force behind it. This was to be my last resort in case a bear unexpectedly mistook me for a tasty snack. Fortunately, we never had to use it, but the tension during the walk certainly added an extra dimension to the overall experience. Peart's descriptions of various American national parks, such as Arches or Bryce, were also delightful. It was as if I were walking there again. In a letter to a friend, Peart writes that some people, mainly strangers who met him in his apparent capacity as a free-spirited motorcyclist, said that they envied his freedom. This is way more freedom than anyone should ever desire, and carries way more baggage than freedom can ever sustain. This is more like desperate flight, and another name I have for myself is the Ghost Rider. I am a ghost. I carry a few ghosts with me, and I'm riding through a world that isn't quite real. But I'm okay as long as I keep moving. Occasionally he visits friends or family. He experiences this time and again as a warm bath, but these visits also have a downside. Inevitably, I would have to pay for this interlude by suffering yet another attack of the visitor syndrome. He is alone again, at the mercy of the dangers of silence and thought. Peart had arranged with his motorcycle buddy Brutus to ride together starting at the border of Mexico. But Brutus, who occasionally got mixed up in shady business, was caught with a batch of marijuana and has to go to jail. As a result, their plan falls through, but more and more I began to see the journey through the eyes of Brutus. On the phone, Brutus had said something like, "You just get out there and ride for me." And I told him I would. My whole life, from then on, became a letter to Brutus. On November 25, Peart is then already in Mexico. He writes the following in his diary. "Thinking today as I rode that my survival remains an act of pure will, holding myself together like a soldier wounded in battle and feeling that I could collapse from within at any time. No peace anywhere, no redemption imaginable. Just sense of waiting, killing time. Waiting for what? For time to pass, I guess. Can there be healing? Don't think so. Only strive to minimize scars, not get too twisted, too crippled inside." He keeps riding his motorbike until after Christmas. He will then have been on the road for 4 months and 1 week, during which he will have covered 46,239 kilometers. Had I changed? Had I healed at all? The only thing Peart knows for sure is that he wants to go to his house on the lake above Montreal. From Belize, he drives to Mexico City, where he parks his BMW and catches a plane home. With some malicious pleasure, he laughs at himself as he decorates the house to his own taste. For example, he puts his Ducati 916 in the living room, something Jackie would never have approved of. His brother Daniel writes to him that Neal is farther along in the grieving process than he is. This initially stings Peart, but then I realized that in a way it was true. To a degree which varied every day, I had grown used to the idea of being alone, and part of me had simply accepted that this was how it was going to be now. I realized that I had been a full-time professional griever for 1 year and 4 months by then. He invites a few friends to come over to his lake house every 2 weeks. Every day he goes outside for a long walk on his snowshoes or cross-country skiing. In a letter to Brutus, he writes that according to all the grief books he read when he was in London with Jackie, he must now be in the acceptance phase. Acceptance seems to be where I am at now, for when I first came into this house and looked around at the photos of Jackie and Selena, the words that came into my head were, "I know." That's all. Not that I can really accept it or necessarily live with it, but at least I know. Later, in another letter, he lists the statistics of his journey. After 46,000 kilometers, 4 countries, 6 provinces, 2 territories, 11 American and 17 Mexican states, maybe it took all that just to say, "I know." During the months in his lake house, it slowly dawns on him that the healing road has not brought nearly enough healing. Another important process during this journey was that of reconstructing myself. I expect that job will continue for a while. Needless to say, my foundation has been shaken so profoundly that even now I have no idea about such rudimentary notions as who am I and what is life. And to someone else, so far it's been working okay, but I'm not out of the woods yet, not by a long way. Peart writes a truly beautiful letter on January 26, 1999 to Stephen, Jackie's brother. In this long letter I have underlined a lot. He describes people like himself and Stephen as the walking wounded. My life and self were reduced to absolute zero, and even now I think of my previous self as that other guy, and feel we share nothing but the same set of memories. Recently, Peart had seen his own instructional video for drummers again. It was like the guy talking and playing on the screen wasn't me. If there is any point in carrying on, it is not in simply existing, in cluttering up the world with another bitter and nasty old man, or a joyless hermit, or a suffering martyr forever living in the past and punishing everyone else for what life has done to me. And again, about acceptance, I don't like the feel of the word acceptance. I found on my return from the healing road that after all that time and distance, I had at least transcended denial. But to me, knowing that these things are true doesn't mean I accept that truth. Far from it. As far as I can see, I will never accept that life is supposed to turn out this way. Some well-meaning people have tried to offer me what they perceived to be a comforting thought of the everything must happen for a reason kind, but I shut them up right away, as politely as I can. Somehow they don't see that it's absolutely no consolation to look at it that way, and more, it brings up some terrible questions in your head. There's some kind of reason? What? They deserve to die? I deserve to lose them. The world didn't need people like Jackie and Selena. Bullshit. In another letter, he addresses the question of what strange force has driven him the past few months. The answer is, I don't know. Not yet, anyway. I've been so busy figuring out how to survive that I've given no thought to the why, and right now I don't have the brain power, or perhaps the need, to go there. The trouble with thinking about why I chose to live is that I can't avoid thinking about why Jackie chose to die. Peart manages to stay in the lake house until the end of April, but then his little baby soul has to hit the road again. On April 21st, 1999, he flies to Mexico City to get his trusted two-wheeler out of the shed and hit the road again. In Los Angeles, he meets a woman who strikes a chord with him for the first time. Unable to deal with that confusing upwelling of feelings I was not ready to face or even acknowledge, feelings I had thought were dead, maybe forever, I decided to get away from there for a while. Try to think this through like a sensible person. Eventually he decides to meet this woman, Gabrielle, even though he is still very confused. This flirtation comes to nothing, but it certainly sparked up my life, just thinking about her. After having added another 15,000 kilometers to the odometer of his motorcycle, Peart spends the summer back at his lake house. A life purpose, let alone a zest for life, has not yet returned. He discovers that swimming as a new activity helps to keep his mind at a standstill. But the days are hard for him. It was obviously time for radical action, desperate measures, and I had one last refuge to explore: drumming. In order not to put pressure on himself or to give his two band members any false hope, Peart secretly books a studio. I hadn't played for almost 2 years since the last show of the Test for Echo tour, but after playing the instrument for more than 30 years, the physical technique came back readily. He feels that he can tell his story with the drumming. I can still communicate through the instrument. On August 29, 1999, he sets off again, this time on his BMW K1200 RS. His front wheel takes him east to Newfoundland and eventually down to New York. A friend of his, Andrew, wants to set him up with a woman who would like to get in touch with him, Carrie. Although she is a very beautiful woman, Peart, with the bad taste of his adventure with Gabriella still in his mouth, is not interested in such a voyage of discovery at that moment. After about 12,000 kilometers on the K, he changes bikes at the lake house and continues his flight further on his GS. He is going to ride the coastline of the western United States. Traveling was obviously still the best thing for me, and I had decided I would try to stay out until Christmas again. On this trip, he feels that things are starting to interest him more. The idea of writing a serious book about his adventures as ghostwriter takes root in his head and won't let go. During his travels, he agrees to meet Carrie with Andrew. The final chapter of the book begins thus. In less than a day, I was in Los Angeles. In less than a week, Andrew introduced me to Carrie, my real angel of redemption. In less than a month, we were deeply in love. And in less than a year, we were married in a fairy tale wedding near Santa Barbara. Though even after we met, I resisted this unlikely salvation for a while, and the next day I continued blithely on my travels. Yet he returns to her. After a 2-day visit to Santa Monica, where Carrie lived, it was all over for the ghostwriter. I committed myself to building a new life with Carrie, and once again, I wanted to live forever. Peart went back into the studio with Rush and recorded the album Vapor Trails. This album opens with a few exuberant and impressive bars from his drum kit, as if he wants to say to everyone who wants to hear it, I'm back. I do not know the kind of sorrow and weariness of life that Neal Peart had to endure, and I hope I never will. His will to survive forced him to get on his motorbike and ride more than 88,000 kilometers. Seemingly pointless kilometers, but appearances can be deceiving. The time used on his ghost riding he got through as painlessly as possible, so that it could ultimately do its healing work. I am deeply impressed by the writing skills of this musician. In sometimes poetic and sometimes everyday language, he sketches a razor-sharp portrait of himself during this period of purification. In doing so, he is honest and bears witness to profound wisdom. It came as a complete shock to me to hear of his passing in January of 2020. He had been diagnosed with brain cancer 3 years earlier. I revere him as the drummer of one of my favorite bands of all time, but I absolutely love him as a writer. After reading Ghost Rider, I very quickly read his other works. I'll show them to you very quickly. This is Roadshow. I accidentally bought a large font size book, which read very easily, but there are very many pages. This is almost 700 pages in this edition. Traveling Music, a small story which was co-written with Kevin J. Anderson called Drumbeats. And then he had 3 books with the main title Far and Near, which is a very nice illustrated sort of travel journal he kept every time when he was on tour with Rush. And in between the venues, he would take his motorbike. If possible, he would take his motorbike as his mode of transportation to the next concert. This one is called On Days Like These. The second one is called Bring That Horizon to Me. And the third one is called A Prize Every Time. They are very nice books to read. I also read the book Clockwork Angels. This is the same story as their latest album, the latest Rush album. This was written by Kevin J. Anderson, a good friend of Neal Peart, but the idea of the story was Neal's. Very nice book. It's sort of fantasy, sort of steampunk fantasy sort of setting. Very nice. And the only book I haven't yet read, but have in my possession, is The Masked Rider. This was the first book he published, and it's about his cycling trip through West Africa, sorry. I'm keeping this one, just savoring it for the moment I want to read it, because it's the last book I have by Neal Peart. Without exception, all these books are very good books, but nothing beats his intimate Ghost Rider. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.